back everyone to this lecture on the def keyword, which allows us to create a function with Python. Creating a function in Python actually requires a very specific syntax, including the aforementioned def keyword. It also requires correct indentation and proper structure. Let's begin getting an overview of the Python function structure line by line. So here's the first line of an example function, and it all starts off with this def keyword, essentially standing for the definition of the function. And this keyword just tells Python, hey, what I'm about to write is a function. So you have def, and then you have the name of the function. And you decide on the function name, and you should notice this so-called snake casing. So in general, by convention, Python uses snake casing for the name of the function, and snake casing just means that you're going to use all lowercase letters with underscores between the words. And this is by convention, so this means that in general, if you're looking at someone else's Python script, you can easily tell what's a function because of the use of snake casing. Later on, we'll see that when we learn about object-oriented programming, class calls use camel casing. But for right now, in general, by convention, you should use snake casing, all lowercase with underscores between the words. It will still work if you don't follow snake casing, but in order for your code to be readable by other Python developers, you should use snake casing when naming functions. Then you'll notice we have parentheses here. So the parentheses come at the end, and later on we'll see how we can pass in arguments or parameters into the function, where arguments or parameters are essentially just words saying, take this variable and pass it into the function in order to work with it within the function. And then finally, you'll notice a colon, which indicates an upcoming indented block. Everything indented is then inside the function. So after that comes the optional multi-line string to describe a function. This is called a docstring, and you specify a docstring with triple quotes, which essentially allows you to write a multi-line comment. And this code does not get executed. It's just comment code essentially for someone else who's reading this function, or for you at a later date, that will explain what the function is supposed to do. And now you should start noting that everything inside the function has indented. And then you're going to write the code that you want to be executed every time you call the function. So for example, this is a very simple function. All it's going to do is print hello. So if you were to call this function, you would simply say name of function, and in this case, open close parentheses. So the function's executed, and then it takes whatever code is inside the function and runs it. In this case, it will just print hello. So there's your resulting output. Now functions can begin to get more complex, such as actually accepting a parameter or argument, such as name here. So name is just essentially a made-up variable that I decided to use. You can call it whatever you want here, but we'll call it name. And what we're going to do is use this as an argument to be passed by the user. So notice what happens here. Here I have my function, and it accepts this parameter, name, and what it's going to do is say print hello plus name. So that essentially means that name should be a string, and I'm going to concatenate it with hello. So that means when I call my function here, it says name of function, Jose, and then it'll say hello Jose, which means now I can pass in any string I want into name of function, and it should say hello and then that string. Now typically, however, we're going to use the return keyword to send back the result of the function instead of just printing it out. So far, if we take a look at our examples here, we've just been using print inside of the function calls, like print hello or print hello plus name. In general, you're very rarely just going to have a print inside of a function, because you might as well just call print outside of the function. Instead, you're going to use what is known as the return keyword. And return allows us to assign the output of the function to a new variable. Now we're going to have a much deeper discussion on the return keyword later on in the notebook, so keep that in mind. A really common question is what's the difference between print versus return inside of a function, and we're going to clarify that when we actually start coding out these functions within a notebook. But here, let's just look through a very simple example. I've created a function called add function, and it takes in two arguments or two parameters, num1 and num2. And keep in mind that you can call these variables whatever you want, so it's very flexible in the naming scheme. And then it's going to return the result of num1 plus num2. You should also notice here that return doesn't have any parentheses attached to it, unlike a print function. And so return then allows you to save the result to a variable, which print does not. So that means when I call add function 1, 2, I'm saying num1 is 1, num2 is 2, And so it's going to, inside of the function, do 1 plus 2, which is 3. And since it's using return, I can now save that result to a variable. So I can say result is equal to whatever add function 1 comma 2 returns to me. So in that case, if I were to later on print the result or use it somewhere else in my code, it's the number 3. So most functions, as I mentioned, will use return. Rarely will a function only print, and we'll show you examples of both use cases in the Jupyter Notebook. Okay, let's start creating functions with Python. I'll see you at the next lecture where we're going to jump straight to a notebook.